Tracy, please, it's me. Please, just give me 1 minute.
I know what I did to you. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but please, my daughter has not eaten since morning. Please, just forgive me.
3 years ago, this same woman kneeling on hot tarmac had a door, solid, dry, and warm, while a widow stood outside it in the rain with a crying child, begging to be heard. She chose silence that night. Today, silence has come back to sit in the driver's seat, staring right back at her. But what happens in the next few minutes will decide whether this story ends in revenge or something far greater than revenge. Stay with me. You are not ready for how this one unfolds. Before we rewind to where this all began, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments below, and if you believe that what a person sows will always find its way back to them, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, because this story is about to show you exactly how far a woman can fall and how far grace can choose to reach back down for her. In a small compound belonging to Regina, a wealthy landlady, there lived a woman whose kindness was tested every single month by the same person, in the same yard, in front of the same eyes. Her name was Tracy, and this is her story. The first Saturday of every month came like a small storm to that compound. Everyone felt it, but only one person carried the full weight of it. That morning, Tracy left her small shop early, where she fried akara and puff-puff for the local people. It was the only work she had left, after the school where she once taught closed its doors for good. By the time she returned, her wrapper carried the smell of oil, and her palm carried a small, tightly folded bag of Naira notes. It was rent day, and Regina did not wait for anyone to come late. Regina Fashina stood by her doorway like a queen receiving visitors, one hand on her waist, her gold earrings catching the morning light. She did not call Tracy inside. She made her stand right there, in front of the whole compound, and count the money out loud. Tracy's hands were shaking, not because she was afraid of numbers, but because she knew what was coming. She counted slowly, Naira note after Naira note, until the pile sat in Regina's open palm. Neighbors paused what they were doing. A woman washing plates stopped mid-scrub. Two men playing drafts by the fence lowered their voices to nothing. Everybody wanted to watch, even if nobody wanted to be seen watching. Regina counted the money a second time, then looked up with a face that had already decided what it wanted to say before she opened her mouth. "This is not complete." Tracy blinked. "Madam, I counted it. It is complete. Are you calling me a liar in my own compound?" Regina's voice rose, sharp enough to reach every open window around them. "You people will kill me with your poverty and your excuses." A small crowd had gathered without meaning to. Tracy stood there, holding the empty plastic bag, feeling every eye on her back like a weight pressing her down. She did not argue further. She knew that arguing with Regina in front of people only fed the fire. Inside a small room nearby, a 9-year-old girl named Eliana peeped through a crack in the door, watching her mother stand there, being spoken to like a child. Her small hands gripped the edge of the doorframe, her eyes moving between her mother's face and the crowd of strangers watching. An old man named Mr. Dada, who had swept that compound for over a decade, moved his broom slower than usual, close enough to hear everything, but too wise to interrupt. His eyes met Tracy's for one brief second. It was not pity, it was something closer to quiet respect for a woman who refused to break where everyone could see her. Regina finally allowed Tracy to leave, but not before adding one more thing, loud enough for the whole compound to carry into their kitchens that afternoon. "Continue like this," she said, turning to another tenant, as if Tracy were no longer there, "and that one will be begging on this same road before the year runs out." Tracy walked back to her room without looking back. She closed the door gently, so her daughter would not hear how hard her heart was beating. She sat on the edge of the bed, folded her hands together, and said nothing. Eliana came and sat beside her, without a word, leaning her small head against her mother's arm. Tracy wrapped an arm around her daughter and held her close, staring at the wall in front of her, saying nothing, because there was nothing that morning that words could fix. But somewhere behind her calm face, something had already begun to shift. Not anger, but something quieter, and far more dangerous to a woman like Regina, who had never once imagined that the widow she mocked every month might one day stop being afraid of her. 3 weeks later, trouble came early. The market had been slow that week, rain falling on and off, keeping customers away from Tracy's small shop. When Saturday came again, the rent money was short, and Regina noticed immediately. She always did. "Tracy," she said, standing at her window with her arms folded, watching Tracy cross the yard. "You, this woman, you enjoy testing my patience. Madam, please, business was slow this week. I will complete it by tomorrow." Regina came down from her doorstep slowly, the way a cat moves when it has already decided to play with something before eating it. "No, no, I will forgive you the delay," she said, smiling in a way that made Tracy's stomach turn. "But you will clean this gutter for me, all of it, today." The compound gutter ran the full length of the building, thick with old leaves, dirty water, and months of neglect. It was not Tracy's job. It had never been anyone's job, but the compound's shared responsibility. But Regina wanted a lesson taught, and she wanted an audience for it. Tracy knelt by the gutter that afternoon, with her wrapper tied high and her bare hands doing what a shovel should have done. Sweat ran down her face. Tenants passed by, some looking away out of shame, others slowing down out of curiosity. Mr. Dada came out with an old bucket, intending to help. Regina's voice cut across the yard before he could bend down. "Leave her. This one is her own punishment, not yours." The old man straightened up slowly, said nothing, and placed the bucket down beside Tracy, instead of walking away with it. It was a small act, but it was the loudest thing anyone had done for her in weeks. Later that evening, once the yard had gone quiet and most doors were shut, Tracy sat outside her room, her hands raw, thinking about how different her life used to be, before the school closed and cost her the only steady income she ever had, before her husband, Emeka, died in an accident that took him and left her holding a daughter and nothing else. She had been a teacher once. Now she scrubbed another woman's gutter to keep a roof over her child's head. She thought about the small shop she had built from nothing, one pot of oil at a time, and how proud she had been the day she first sold enough akara to cover a full week's food. That pride felt far away tonight, sitting there with dirty water still drying on her hands. Inside her own quarters, without anyone watching, Regina counted a stack of receipts from a market woman who owed her money on a different matter entirely. She did not think about the widow scrubbing her gutter outside. She had long stopped thinking of Tracy as a person with a story worth considering, only as a tenant who was always, somehow, a problem to be managed. But outside, in the quiet dark, Eliana stepped out to sit beside her mother, holding a small cloth for her hands. She said nothing about the gutter or the shame of it. She simply sat close, the way children do when they understand more than adults expect them to. Tracy looked at her daughter's face in the moonlight and felt something steady inside her chest, something that had nothing to do with Regina at all. Whatever this compound demanded of her, whatever new punishment waited around next month's corner, she still had this, a daughter who loved her without condition, and a will that refused, no matter how many times it was tested, to finally break. Some decisions in life do not come with easy answers. They only come with a choice between two kinds of pain, and a mother left to decide which one she can survive. That was the choice sitting in front of Tracy, the week Eliana's school announced the entrance examination for the private secondary school across town. It was the kind of school Tracy had once dreamed her daughter would attend, back when she still had a teaching job and a husband coming home every evening. The form had a deadline. The exam fee had a deadline. Both fell on the very week rent was due. Tracy sat with the paper spread across her small table one night, doing the kind of math that never adds up in a poor woman's favor. If she paid the fee, rent would be short. If she paid rent, her daughter would miss the one exam that could change the direction of her whole life. She looked over at Eliana, asleep in the corner of the room, her small chest rising and falling evenly, unaware that her future was being decided in the quiet hours while she slept. Tracy thought about her own childhood, about a mother who had sacrificed her own comfort so Tracy could sit for exams that eventually made her a teacher. She thought about the promise she had made to herself the day Emeka died, that whatever happened to her, her daughter would not lose the chance at something better. By morning, her mind was made up. She woke Eliana gently and sat her down at the edge of the bed. "I want to talk to you about something important," she said. "Is it about the school fee?" Eliana asked, her voice small. Tracy nodded. "I am going to pay for your exam this week. I need you to understand something, though. It means I may not have enough for rent, and Madam Regina may not be happy about it." Eliana's face folded into worry. "Will she throw us out?" "I do not know," Tracy said honestly, pulling her daughter close. "But I know this. An exam like this does not come twice. If I do not give you this chance now, I may never forgive myself. Whatever comes after, we will face it together." Eliana held onto her mother tightly, her small arms wrapped around Tracy's waist, saying nothing more, but understanding, in the way children sometimes understand more than they are given credit for, that her mother had just chosen her over safety. That week, Tracy paid the entrance exam fee with money that should have gone to Regina. She watched her daughter walk into the examination hall on the appointed day with a quiet kind of pride swelling in her chest, the kind that made every risk feel worth it, at least for that one morning. But pride does not pay rent, and Tracy knew what was coming. The following Saturday arrived with dark clouds already gathering over the sky, the kind of clouds that promised a heavy downpour before the day was through. Tracy dressed early, tied her wrapper tight, and headed to her small shop to fry akara and puff-puff, praying that a strong morning of sales might be enough to cover at least part of what she owed. She kissed Eliana's forehead before leaving, told her to stay indoors because of the weather, and stepped out into a sky that was already beginning to darken at the edges. She did not know, as she walked toward her shop that morning, that this single, ordinary decision, to sell a little longer, to wait out the rain, to try one more time to make enough money, would lead her back home to something no mother should ever have to see. The rain started before noon and did not stop. Tracy stood under the small canopy of her shop, watching customers hurry past without stopping, umbrellas low over their heads, no one interested in buying akara in weather like that. By afternoon, her tray was still half full, her earnings barely enough to buy tomorrow's oil, let alone settle what she owed Regina. She waited as long as she could, hoping the rain would ease, but the sky only grew darker. Finally, soaked and defeated, she packed up her things and began the long walk home, her heart heavy with what she already knew was waiting for her. Back at the compound, Regina had grown tired of waiting. She had sent word twice that morning demanding the rent, and twice she had received no answer, because Tracy was not home to give one. By afternoon, her patience, thin on the best of days, had run out completely. She called two young men from around the compound to help her, and together they broke into Tracy's room. They pulled out everything: the mattress, the small table, Eliana's school books, pots, plates, the little box where Tracy kept what few valuables she had, and threw it all into the open compound, right into the rain that had not stopped falling since morning. Eliana, home from school, stood frozen at the doorway of a neighbor's room where she had taken shelter, watching strangers throw her family's entire life out into the mud and water, unable to move, unable to speak, tears mixing with the rain on her face. By the time Tracy turned onto the compound path, wet and tired from her long walk, she saw it from a distance, a pile of soaked belongings scattered across the yard, her daughter standing small and shaking near the gate. She stopped walking. For a moment, her legs would not carry her forward. Then she ran the rest of the way, dropping her tray of unsold akara in the mud, gathering Eliana into her arms first, checking her daughter's face, her hands, making sure she was unharmed before she allowed herself to even look at the ruin of everything else around them. "Mummy, they broke the door," Eliana said between shaking breaths. "They just started throwing everything." Tracy stood in the rain, soaked to the skin, staring at her scattered life lying in the mud, and for a long moment she could not speak at all. Something inside her had gone completely still, the way a person goes still, right before they either break apart or find a strength they did not know they had. She left Eliana with a neighbor and walked straight to Regina's door, knocking hard enough for her knuckles to ache. "Madam, please, just give me a little time. I can explain everything." There was no answer. Through the window, she could see Regina seated comfortably inside, a glass of wine in one hand, a plate of food in front of her, the television playing softly, completely undisturbed by the storm she had just caused. Regina glanced toward the door once, saw who it was, and turned her attention back to her meal, without a word. Tracy knocked again, longer this time, her voice rising now, desperate. "Please, I have a child, just a few more days." Silence answered her, thick and deliberate, the kind of silence a person chooses on purpose to make a point. Tracy stood there in the rain, until her arms grew tired of knocking, until the truth of her situation finally settled fully into her chest. There would be no mercy tonight. There would be no more waiting. She walked back to where her belongings lay ruined in the mud, gathered what she could carry, took her daughter's hand, and walked out through the compound gate, into a dark, wet street, with no roof, no plan, and no idea where the night would take them. The street at night looked different from how it looked in daylight. Shops that were once loud with music and voices now stood locked behind metal doors, and the only sound left was the steady fall of rain and the soft, tired steps of a mother walking with nowhere to go. Tracy carried what she could in one hand and held Eliana's hand tightly in the other, her daughter's small legs struggling to keep pace, both of them soaked through, both of them silent, because there was nothing left to say that the rain had not already said for them. They walked past the church, past the closed provision store, past the junction where motorcycle riders usually gathered during the day, but had long since gone home. Tracy did not know where she was walking to. She only knew she could not stay standing outside that compound gate a moment longer, in front of a door that had refused to open for her. Eliana's steps began to slow, her small body shivering from the cold. "Mommy, I am tired," she said quietly. Tracy stopped, knelt down, despite the wet ground, and pulled her daughter into her arms, lifting her the rest of the way, even though her own body ached with exhaustion. She kept walking, one foot after the other, refusing to let her legs give up, before her heart did. It was near the second junction that a car slowed down beside them. Tracy's first instinct was fear. A woman alone at night with a child, a car slowing beside her. She had heard enough stories to know how such moments could turn dangerous. She held Eliana tighter and kept walking, refusing to look toward the car. The window rolled down. "Excuse me, madam," a man's voice called out, calm and unhurried. "Are you all right? It is late, and this rain is not stopping anytime soon." Tracy turned slightly, cautious. Under the streetlight, she could make out a man in his early 40s, dressed simply, despite the clearly expensive car he drove, his face carrying none of the impatience she expected from a stranger interrupting his night. "We are fine," Tracy said, though her voice shook with cold, betraying the lie. The man studied her for a moment, then looked at Eliana, whose small body was trembling visibly against her mother's shoulder. Something in his expression shifted, less like a stranger being polite, and more like a man who could not simply drive away from what he was seeing. "I am not asking to be nosy," he said gently, "but you cannot walk around with a child in this weather, at this hour. Please, let me help you find somewhere safe, at least for tonight." Tracy hesitated, torn between the fear she carried and the exhaustion pulling at every part of her body. She looked down at Eliana, whose eyes were half closed now, too tired to hold up her own head. "My name is Richard," the man said, stepping out of the car to open the back door properly, keeping a respectful distance. "I promise you, I only want to help. You can decide what you want to do once you are somewhere dry and warm." Something about the steadiness in his voice, the complete absence of urgency or demand, made Tracy's guard lower just slightly. She thought of Eliana shivering in her arms, thought of the empty street stretching endlessly ahead of them, and finally, with nothing left to lose, she nodded. They got into the car in silence, water dripping onto the clean seats, neither of them speaking as the vehicle pulled away from the dark, empty road. Tracy watched the streetlights pass by the window, holding her sleeping daughter close, wondering, with a mixture of fear and fragile hope, exactly what kind of night this stranger's kindness was about to become. The house Richard brought them to was unlike anything Tracy had ever stepped inside. Tall gates opened onto a wide compound with a garden, a car park holding 2 more vehicles, and a building so large it seemed to swallow the darkness around it with its own soft light. A woman in an apron met them at the door, unsurprised, as though her employer bringing home strangers in the middle of the night was simply part of her duties. She was introduced as the chef, and within minutes, warm towels, dry clothes, and a hot meal appeared before Tracy could even finish taking in her surroundings. Eliana, wrapped in a blanket twice her size, ate slowly, her eyes heavy but calmer now, safe in a way she had not been in hours. Tracy sat across from her, watching, still cautious, still waiting for some catch to reveal itself, because kindness this large rarely came without conditions in the world she knew. But no conditions came that night. Richard showed them to a guest room, told them to rest, and left without another word, closing the door gently behind him. The next morning, over breakfast, Richard asked his questions carefully, giving Tracy room to answer only what she wanted to share. She told him enough, about the rent, about the exam fee, about the rain and the door that never opened. She left out nothing that mattered, and to her surprise, he did not interrupt with pity or judgment. He simply listened. "You are welcome to stay here," he said finally, "for as long as you need. There is no rush, and there is no debt attached to this. My chef will look after you and your daughter." Tracy studied his face carefully, searching for the trick, the hidden price. She found none, only the quiet steadiness of a man who seemed to mean exactly what he said. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, the tired lines on Tracy's face began to soften. Eliana's laughter returned, filling the halls of the big house in a way that seemed to lighten something in Richard too, something Tracy noticed but did not yet understand. One afternoon, sitting together in the garden, Richard turned to her with a question that had clearly been sitting with him for some time. "What do you want to do, Tracy? Now that you have some peace, what would make you happy?" Tracy thought about it honestly. "I would like a small shop," she said, "selling foodstuffs, something of my own, even if it is small. I do not want to depend on anyone forever." Richard nodded slowly, considering her words. A few days later, he called her into his study and told her about a supermarket he owned across town, fully built but never opened, sitting empty because he had never found the right person to run it. "I want you to manage it," he said, "not as a favor, as a job you have earned by how you have carried yourself since the day I met you." Tracy's hands went to her mouth, disbelief and joy colliding all at once. It was more than she had ever dared to ask for, more than she had imagined possible after a night that began with her belongings thrown into the mud. She accepted, and within weeks she had transformed the quiet, empty building into something alive, shelves organized with care, customers greeted with warmth, a business that began to hum with the same quiet strength Tracy had carried through every hardship before it. Richard watched all of this from a distance at first, then closer still, until one evening, standing by his office window, watching her manage the floor below with such grace and warmth, he realized the gratitude he felt toward her had slowly, quietly, become something he could no longer call simple. Some feelings arrive like thunder, loud and impossible to ignore. Others arrive quietly, the way morning light creeps into a room, so slow that a person only notices once the whole space has already changed. For Richard, it was the second kind. He had not planned to feel anything beyond simple kindness for the woman he found walking in the rain that night. But kindness has a way of growing roots when it is watered daily by small things. The sound of Tracy humming while she prepared dinner, the way she organized his household without ever being asked, the patience in her voice whenever Eliana ran to show her a drawing from school. He watched her build the supermarket into something thriving, watched customers speak of her with warmth whenever her name came up in conversation, watched his own home fill with a kind of steadiness it had not known since he lost his wife years earlier. And slowly, without meaning to, he found himself looking forward to the sound of her footsteps in the hallway, more than he looked forward to anything else in his day. But saying it out loud was another matter entirely. Richard was not a man used to hesitation. In his work as an engineer, he made decisions worth millions without losing sleep. Yet here, in his own house, with a woman who lived under his roof and depended on his kindness, he found himself unsure, afraid that speaking his heart might make her feel she owed him something she did not truly feel in return. He carried this quietly for weeks, watching for signs, second-guessing every glance, every small laugh they shared over dinner. It was Eliana, in her simple, unfiltered way, who finally pushed things forward. "Uncle Richard," she said one evening, looking up from her plate with the directness only a child can manage, "why do you always look at Mummy like that?" Richard nearly choked on his food. Tracy's face went warm with embarrassment, though she said nothing, suddenly finding great interest in the food on her own plate. Later that night, once Eliana had gone to bed, Richard found Tracy sitting alone on the veranda, watching the compound lights flicker against the dark garden. He sat beside her, quiet for a long moment before finally finding his courage. "Tracy," he said carefully, "I need to say something, and I need you to know you are free to answer honestly, without any fear of what it might change." Tracy turned to face him, waiting. "I have come to care for you," he said, "not out of pity, not because of what happened that night in the rain, because of who you are, how you carry yourself, how you love your daughter, how you have built something beautiful out of very little. I would like to know if there is any room in your heart for me." For a moment, Tracy said nothing, her eyes searching his face the way she had searched it that very first morning, looking for a trick that never came. "I have felt the same for some time," she finally admitted, her voice soft. "I was only afraid to name it, because I did not want to seem ungrateful for everything you have already given us." Richard reached for her hand gently. "This is not about gratitude, Tracy. This is about choice. I am not asking you to owe me anything. I am asking if you would choose this, choose me, freely." Tracy's answer came not in words at first, but in the way she let her hand rest fully in his, steady and certain. That evening, sitting together under a sky finally clear of rain, the small family that had been quietly forming under one roof for months became something neither of them was afraid to name anymore. While one woman's life was being rebuilt piece by piece, another woman's life was quietly falling apart, though she did not yet know how far the fall would take her. Back at the compound, Regina's world had begun to shake in ways she never expected. For months, government officials had been surveying the land around her compound, marking buildings with red paint and notices that most tenants ignored, assuming, as people often do, that such warnings rarely turned into action. Regina ignored them too consumed with her usual routine of enjoying life, to pay much attention to paperwork nailed to walls. She had never been a woman who saved for tomorrow, and she had raised her daughter the same way. Money that came in went out just as quickly. New clothes for both of them, gold jewelry, expensive meals at restaurants they could not really afford, weekend outings and parties that meant more to them than any account balance. Mother and daughter spent freely, side by side, building a lifestyle on appearance rather than foundation, never once setting anything aside for a day like the one now waiting for them. When the final notice came, stamped and official, declaring the entire stretch of land unfit and marked for government demolition, with no compensation offered to any structure standing on it, Regina laughed it off in front of her remaining tenants, insisting it was nothing more than officials looking for bribes. She was wrong. The bulldozers arrived on a Tuesday morning, without warning beyond the notices already posted, tearing through walls that had stood for over a decade. Tenants scrambled to save what they could, shouting, crying, dragging mattresses and furniture out into the street as heavy machines reduced the compound to rubble in a matter of hours. Regina stood in the middle of the chaos, watching her home collapse before her eyes, her belongings scattered across the dirt exactly as she had once scattered someone else's. Her older daughter stood beside her, silent, holding a single bag of clothes, everything else lost beneath broken concrete and twisted metal. There was no compensation, there was no relief. There was only the wreckage of a life built entirely on comfort, with nothing set aside for a day like this one. Her husband, already weakened by years of failed business dealings and mounting debts, had little left to offer his wife beyond apologies that changed nothing. Within weeks, whatever remained of their marriage crumbled quietly alongside everything else they had lost. Regina and her daughter found shelter in an incomplete building on the edge of town, a structure without doors, without proper walls, shared uneasily with a handful of other displaced families, all of them waiting for eviction from that shelter too, since the building did not legally belong to any of them. For a woman who once stood in her doorway like a queen, counting another woman's money with disdain, the fall was steep and unforgiving. With no savings, no husband capable of providing, and a daughter depending on her, Regina did the only thing left available to a woman with nothing. She took to the streets, a tray balanced on her head, hawking small items to strangers, who once might have called her madam, back when her name still carried weight around town. Her daughter walked beside her, another tray on her own head, the two of them now sharing a burden neither had ever imagined carrying. They walked those streets each day, exhausted, humbled, mother and daughter side by side, carrying the full weight of a fall neither of them once believed possible for women like them. And somewhere across town, unaware of exactly how far Regina had fallen, Tracy drove through the busy streets in a car of her own, her life having risen just as steeply as Regina's had collapsed, the two women's paths drawing closer to a collision neither of them could yet see coming. There is a kind of moment life sometimes arranges without warning, placing two people on the same road at the exact hour, neither expected to see the other again. That moment found Regina on an ordinary afternoon, tired from hours of hawking under the sun, her tray heavy on her head, her feet aching in slippers worn thin from walking. She had crossed that same busy road many times that week, weaving between cars the way hawkers learn to do out of necessity rather than confidence. That afternoon, exhausted and distracted, she stepped out just a moment too soon, her mind elsewhere, her body moving on tired instinct rather than caution. A car horn sounded sharp and sudden. Regina froze in the middle of the road, her tray tilting dangerously, her heart stopping as the vehicle came to a hard stop only inches from where she stood. For a moment, neither woman moved. Behind the wheel sat Tracy, her hand still pressed against the horn, her chest rising and falling from the shock of what had almost happened. She looked up through the windscreen at the woman, standing frozen in front of her car, and slowly, disbelief spread across her face as recognition settled in. It was Regina, thinner now, her clothes worn, her once proud posture bent under the weight of a tray, and a life that had clearly taken everything from her. Regina recognized her too, and the color drained from her face entirely. Of all the people in that town, of all the cars that could have nearly ended her life that afternoon, it belonged to the very woman she had once thrown out into the rain without a second thought. "Tracy," Regina said, her voice breaking as she moved closer to the car window, her tray forgotten on the ground beside her. "Tracy, is that you?" Tracy said nothing at first, her hands gripping the steering wheel, old memories rising fast and sharp, the rain, her belongings scattered in the mud, Eliana's frightened face at the compound door, the silence behind Regina's window while she begged. "Please," Regina continued, her voice thick with something between shame and desperation. "I am sorry, Tracy. I am so sorry for everything I did to you. I did not know things would turn out this way. Please, just give me a chance to explain." Tracy looked at her for a long moment. The years between them stretched thin and heavy in that single stare. Then, without a word, she rolled up her window, put the car back into gear, and drove away, leaving Regina standing in the middle of the road, tray abandoned, tears falling freely down a face that had once shown no mercy at all. That evening, Tracy sat quietly at home, unable to shake what she had seen. She told Richard everything: the tray, the worn slippers, the desperate apology, the years of humiliation rising back up inside her chest as though no time had passed at all. Richard listened without interrupting, then took her hand gently once she had finished. "I understand why you drove away," he said. "No one would blame you for that. But Tracy, do not let her cruelty plant something inside you that does not belong there. Do not pay evil with evil. You are not that woman, and you never have been, even on your worst day." Tracy sat with his words long after he had gone quiet, turning them over slowly, feeling something shift inside her chest that she could not yet name. Weeks later, in a small church filled with warmth and laughter, Tracy walked down the aisle toward Richard, Eliana ahead of her scattering flower petals, with a joy that lit up the entire room. It was a day of new beginnings, a celebration of everything Tracy had rebuilt from nothing. But even in the middle of her own happiness, one quiet thought remained with her: an old debt of mercy still unpaid, and a woman somewhere in town who had once refused to open a door, now waiting, without knowing it, for one final chance. Marriage settled into Tracy's life the way morning settles into a quiet room, gently, steadily, filling every corner with a light that had been missing for a long time. The supermarket continued to thrive under her management. Eliana grew taller and more confident by the term, and Richard's house, once large and mostly silent, now carried the constant sound of laughter through its halls. Yet even in the middle of her new life, the memory of that afternoon never fully left her. Regina and her daughter kneeling in the dust, the sound of horns behind them, the tears she had driven away from without a word. It followed her quietly through the wedding, through the early months of marriage, through every peaceful evening spent on Richard's veranda. She thought about his words often, about mercy, about refusing to let cruelty plant roots where it did not belong. One evening, months into her new life, she finally spoke to Richard about it directly. "I want to find her," she said, "not for her sake alone, for mine too. I do not want to carry this the rest of my life." Richard nodded without hesitation. "Then let us find her." It took a few days of quiet asking around before someone finally pointed them toward an incomplete building on the edge of town, the same shelter Regina and her daughter had been living in since the demolition. What they found there stopped them both at the doorway. Regina lay on a thin mat on the bare floor, weak and pale, her body clearly worn down by illness and hunger. Her daughter sat beside her, exhausted and frightened, having done everything she could with nothing to work with. The room smelled of sickness and neglect, a far cry from the compound Regina once ruled with such confidence. Tracy stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the full weight of what remained of the woman who once made her count naira notes in shame in front of an entire compound. Whatever anger she had carried that afternoon on the road quietly gave way to something else entirely. "Let us get her to the hospital," Tracy said simply, already moving forward. They arranged transportation immediately, Richard covering every cost without hesitation, and within hours, Regina was receiving proper care, fluids running into her arm, a doctor confirming that a few more days without help might have ended far worse than anyone wanted to consider. When Regina finally woke fully, weak but alert, and saw Tracy sitting beside her bed, she broke down completely, sobbing in a way that carried years of shame behind it. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "After everything I did to you and your daughter. Why would you help me?" Tracy took her hand gently. "Because someone once opened their door for me when they had every reason not to," she said. "I decided a long time ago I would not let what you did to me turn me into someone I do not recognize." Regina wept freely then, apologizing again and again, the weight of years finally breaking loose in that hospital room. Tracy sat with her through it, offering no lecture, no reminder of past cruelty, only the quiet presence of someone who had chosen forgiveness over resentment. Once Regina recovered enough to be discharged, Tracy and Richard arranged a modest but comfortable room for her and her daughter to live in, along with enough support to help her find steady work. It was not luxury, it was not what Regina once had, but it was dignity, offered freely by the very woman she had once stripped of hers. Life continued gently after that. Tracy's supermarket grew busier by the month. Eliana thrived in school, often visiting the shop after classes to help arrange shelves, laughing with customers the way her mother once did behind a tray of akara. And not long after, Tracy discovered she was expecting a child with Richard, a new life beginning inside a home already full of second chances. On quiet evenings, sitting on the same veranda where Richard once asked for her heart, Tracy would sometimes think back to the rain, to the mud, to the door that never opened. And she would remember, with a peace she never thought she would feel, that the same hands once thrown out into a storm had grown strong enough, in the end, to lift someone else out of one. Life has a way of turning tables that no one sees coming. The same door you shut on someone today may be the same door you come knocking on tomorrow. Regina learned that lesson the hard way, but Tracy taught the town something even greater, that kindness, patience, and mercy will always outlast pride and cruelty. So if there is one thing to carry away from this story, let it be this: never look down on anyone because of where they are today. You do not know what tomorrow holds for either of you. Treat people the way you would want to be treated if the tables ever turned, because in this life, they often do. If this story touched you, do not keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in stories that remind us to be better, hit that subscribe button so you never miss what happens next.